The Lives of the Saints by Father Alban Butler. December 22nd, Saints Cyril and Methodius. Constantine, who was afterwards called Cyril, was born at Thessalonica, of an illustrious senatorial Roman family. He had his education at Constantinople and by his great progress in learning deserved to be surnamed the Philosopher. But piety was the most shining part of his character. He was promoted to the priesthood and served the church with great zeal. St. Ignatius being advanced to the patriarchal dignity in 846, Photius set himself to decry his virtues and disputed that every man has two souls. St. Cyril reproved him for this error. Photius answered him that he meant not to hurt anyone, but to try the abilities and find logic of Ignatius. To which wretched excuse Cyril replied, "You have thrown your darts into the midst of the crowd, yet pretend no one will be hurt. How great soever the eyes of your wisdom may be, they are blinded by the smoke of avarice and envy. Your passion against Ignatius deprived you of your sight." This is related by Anastasius the Bibliothecarian, and the aforesaid error was condemned in the 8th General Council. The Khazari at that time desired baptism. These were a tribe of Turkey, the most numerous and powerful nation of the Huns in European Scythia. In the 6th century they were divided into 7, sometimes into 10 tribes, governed by so many independent chagans, that is, chams or kings. They drove the Abares and other nations of the Huns from the banks of the Ethel, since called Volga, towards the Danube, in the reigns of the emperors Mauritius and Tiberius, who both honored them with their alliance, and 2 pompous embassies, described at large by the Emperor Constantine Porphyrogenita and by Theophylactus Simocata. The Khazari, who descended from the Turci, had possessed themselves of a territory near Germany, upon the banks of the Danube, which Porphyrogenita describes in his time to have had the Bulgarians on the east, the Patsinasit, who came also from the Volga, on the north, Moravia on the west, and on the south the Scrobati, a tribe of Bulgarians settled in the mountains. This nation, by a solemn embassy, addressed themselves to the Emperor Michael III and his pious mother Theodora, begging that some priests might be sent to instruct them in the faith. The empress sent for St. Ignatius, the patriarch, and by his advice and authority, St. Cyril was charged with this important mission. This happened in the year 848, as Hensinius and Justus Asimani prove, not in 843, as Coelius writes. The language of the Khazari was not the Slavonian, as Hensinius thinks, but that of the Huns or Turci, which was entirely different, says Asimani. That Cyril understood the Sclavonian, Greek, and Latin languages is clear from the 2 histories of his life. That for this mission he learned also the Turcic, which was spoken by the Huns, Khazari, and Tartars, we cannot doubt. In a short time he instructed and baptized the Cham, and his whole nation, and having settled his church under the care of able pastors, returned to Constantinople, absolutely refusing to accept any part of the great presents with which the prince would have honored him. The saint's second mission was to the Bulgarians, in which his devout brother Methodius, a monk, was his chief assistant. The Bulgari were a Scythian nation, not of the Huns, but of the Sclavi, whose language was quite different from that of the Turci and all the Huns. They seem to have been originally planted near the Volga, and to have retired at the same time with the Abares upon the coming of the numerous swarm of the Turci from the coast of the Caspian Sea, under their Chamturathus, as Evagrius, Theophanes, and Simocata relate. The Bulgari are first mentioned near the Danube, about the year 634, when Cobratus, their king, made an alliance with the Emperor Heraclius against the Abares, as Theophanes and the Patriarch Nicephorus inform us. The Servii were another nation of the Sclavi, who accompanied the Bulgari and founded the kingdom of Servia. The Bulgari possessed themselves of the ancient Mysia and Dacia on both sides of the Danube, now Wallachia, Moldavia, and part of Hungary. They came from the banks of the Volga in the reign of Anastasius and erected here a mighty kingdom. The first seeds of the conversion of this barbarous nation were sown by certain Grecian captives taken at Adrianople in the reign of the Emperor Basil the Macedonian. But this great work was completed many years after by the following means. Boris, king of the Bulgarians, was inclined to the faith by the assiduous long persuasions of his sister, who had zealously embraced it at Constantinople, having been taken captive and detained a long time in the court of the pious empress Theodora. But human motives hardened his heart, till God was pleased to awake him by a more powerful call. This prince, who was passionately fond of hunting, desired the emperor to procure him a picture which should be a curious hunting piece. Methodius, according to the custom of many devout monks of that age, employed himself in drawing pious pictures, and excelled in that art. He was therefore sent to the court of the king, who, having built a new palace, was desirous to adorn it with paintings. He gave the good monk an order to draw him some piece, which by the very sight would strike terror into those that beheld it. Methodius, thinking nothing more awful than the general judgment, represented in the most lively colors and with exquisite art that awful scene with kings, princes, and people standing promiscuously before the throne of the great judge, who appeared armed with all the terrors of infinite majesty and justice, attended by angels. Some were placed on the right hand and others on the left. The moving sight, and still much more the explication of every part of this dreadful scene, strongly affected the mind of the king, who from that moment resolved to banish all other suggestions and to be instructed in the faith, in which Methodius was ready to assist him. He was baptized by Greek priests, not at Constantinople, as some mistake, but in Bulgaria. For all out historians add that upon the news that the king had been baptized in the night, the people took arms the next morning and marched in open rebellion towards the palace. But the king, taking a little cross which he carried in his breast, put himself at the head of his guards and easily defeated the rebels. At his baptism he took the name of Michael. In a short time his people imitated his example and embraced the faith. Pagi places the baptism of this king in 861, Baronius and Hensinius in 845, Joseph Assamani in 865. The new converted king sent ambassadors to Pope Nicholas I with letters and presents, begging instructions what more he ought to do. The Pope, with letters, sent legates to congratulate with him in 867. The legates, being bishops, gave the sacrament of confirmation to those who had been baptized by the Greek priests, though these had before, according to the rite of their church, anointed them with chrism, which the Latins indeed have always done, but on the head in baptism, not on the forehead. The same legates also taught the Bulgarians to fast on Saturdays, which points gave offense to Photius, who, in 866, bade schismatically usurp the patriarchal see and banished St. Ignatius. Some Bulgarians had been baptized in cases of necessity by laymen, and even by infidels. Pope Nicholas I declared this baptism to be good and valid, and answered several other difficulties in the beginning of the year 867. Saints Cyril and Methodius had labored in the conversion of the Bulgarians, though jointly with several other priests, not only Greeks but also Armenians, concerning whose different rites of discipline the Bulgarians consulted Pope Nicholas I, as he testifies in his answer. Our two saints past formed this country into Moravia, so called from a river of that name. The first mention of the Moravians we find made in 825 by Pope Eugenius II in an epistle to the Bishop of Faviana, now called Vienna, anciently Vindobona, in which he appoints the Archbishop of Lorch, which see was since removed to Salzburg, vicar of the Apostolic See in that nation. The Moravians and Corinthians were Slavonian nations which had seized on these countries. The latter were governed by dukes, the former by kings, having first chosen Samo, a Frenchman from Senogagus, a country near Brussels, who had valiantly defended them against the Avars or Huns of Panonia in 622. The most powerful of these kings was Swetopolek, whose kingdom extended to Pomerania in the end of the 7th age, according to Assamani. Two contending dukes, Moimar and Prewina, or Prenina, ruled in Moravia in 850, though this country had been certainly subject to Charlemagne no less than Bavaria and Panonia, as Eginhard relates. Moimar being slain, Rastices, his nephew, received the crown of Moravia from Louis, king of Germany, in 846. He is by Hensinius called also Suatopluk, but falsely, as Assamani proves from the annals of Fulda. This pious prince invited the two missionaries into Moravia and was baptized by them, with a considerable part of his subjects, who had been inclined to think favorably of Christianity by the example of the Bavarians, whom St. Robert, Bishop of Worms, and founder of the Archbishopric of Salzburg, had begun to convert to the faith. Rastix's dying, his nephew and successor Swatopluk persecuted the church. Augustine, in his catalogue of the bishops of Olmütz and Dubravius, says Saint Cyril was ordained first archbishop of the Moravians. This latter relates that Boriway, or Borivorius, Duke of Bohemia, was converted by hearing Cyril and Methodius preach the faith, and being baptized by the latter, he called him into Bohemia, where his wife Ludmilla, his children, and a great part of his people received the sacrament of regeneration, which, according to Cosmas of Prague in his chronicle, happened in 894. Saint Methodius founded at Prague the Church of Our Lady, another of Saints Peter and Paul, and many others over the kingdom. The two brothers, Cyril and Methodius, are styled bishops of the Moravians in Muscovite calendars and in the Roman martyrology. But in the Polish breviary and other monuments it is said that Cyril died a monk, and that only Methodius was consecrated archbishop after his brother's death, and their second life, published by Heinsius, says expressly that the two brother, being called by Pope Nicholas to Rome, upon their arrival found him dead, and Adrian II, Pope, that Cyril put on the monastic habit and died soon after in that city, before he received the episcopal consecration. And Pope John VIII in 879 wrote as follows to the Moravians: Methodius, your archbishop, ordained by our predecessor Adrian, and sent to you, etc. Whereas he calls Cyril only the philosopher, of whom he writes to Count Sventopolk, the Slavonian letters or alphabet invented by Constantine the Philosopher, that the praises of God may be sung, we justly commend. From this testimony of John VIII and the ancient lives of Saint Cyril, it is evident that the Slavonian alphabet was invented, not by Saint Jerome, but by those two apostles of that nation, which is also related by an ancient author who wrote in 878, published by Freyer. Cyril and Methodius translated the liturgy into the Slavonian tongue and instituted Mass to be sold in the same. The Archbishop of Salzburg and the Archbishop of Mentz, jointly with their suffragans, wrote 2 letters still extant to Pope John VIII to complain of this novelty introduced by the Archbishop Methodius. Hereupon the Pope in 878 by 2 letters, one addressed to Tuvantaris, Count of Moravia, and the other to Methodius, whom he styles Archbishop of Panonia, cited the latter to come to Rome, forbidding him in the meantime to say Mass in a barbarous tongue. Methodius obeyed, and repairing to Rome, gave ample satisfaction to the Pope, who confirmed to him the privileges of the archiepiscopal see of the Moravians, declared him exempt from all dependence on the Archbishop of Salzburg, and approved for the Sclavonians the use of the liturgy and breviary in their own tongue, as he testifies in his letter to Count Sventopolk, still extant. It is clear from the letters of Pope John and from the 2 lives of this saint that this affair had never been discussed either by Pope Nicholas or Pope Adrian, as Bona and some others have mistaken. The Sclavonian tongue is to this day used in the liturgy in that church. The Sclavonian Missal was revised by an order of Urban VIII in 1631, and his brief and approbation are prefixed to this Missal printed at Rome in 1745 at the expense of the Congregation de Propagande Fide. By the same congregation, in 1688, was printed at Rome, by order of Innocent XI, the Sclavonian Breviary, with the brief of Innocent X prefixed, by which it is approved and enjoined. The Sclavonians celebrate the liturgy in this tongue at Leghorn, Aquileia, and in other parts of Italy. When Saint Methodius was returned from Rome, he had much to suffer from the invective and opposition of some neighboring bishop, perhaps of Passau or Salzburg, in Bavaria. For Saint Rodbert or Rupert, Bishop of Worms, in 699 had converted the Boege or Biverage, and having established the archbishopric of Juva or Salzburg, returned to Worms, and there Saint Rupert's successors, especially Saint Virgilius, converted the Corinthians, who were also Sclavonians, and their successors complained of the erection of the archbishopric of Moravia as a curtailing of their ancient jurisdiction. But Pope John VIII supported the exemption of the archbishopric of Moravia and justified the conduct of Saint Methodius. Hearing of the persecution he met with from the neighboring bishops, he wrote to him in 881, congratulating with him upon the success of his labors and the purity of his faith, tenderly exhorting him to patience and to overcome evil with good, and promising to support him in his dignity and in all his undertakings for the honor of God. Saint Methodius planted the faith with such success that the nations which he cultivated with his labors became models of fervor and zeal. Boris, or Michael, the first Christian king Bulgaria, renounced his crown about the year 880, and putting on the monastic habit, led an angelical life on earth. Stradowski, in his Sacra Moravi Historia, styles SS, Cyril and Methodius, the apostles of Moravia, Upper Bohemia, Silesia, Khazaria, Croatia, Circassia, Bulgaria, Bosnia, Russia, Dalmatia, Panonia, Dacia, Carinthia, Carniola, and of almost all the Slavonian nations. Saint Methodius lived to an advanced old age, though the year of his death is not certain. The Greeks and Muscovites honor Saint Cyril on the 14th of February, and Saint Methodius on the 11th of May. The Roman martyrology joins them both together on the 9th of March. Dubravius and others attribute to them many miracles, which Baronius also mentions in his notes on the Roman martyrology. He adds that the relics of these two brothers were lately found under the altar of a very ancient chapel in the Church of St. Clement in Rome, and are still honorably preserved in that church. Octavius Pansiroli, in Thesaurus Absconditus Alm Urbis, and Henschenius say the same, but the latter shows that some small portions have been translated into Moravia and are enshrined in the collegiate church at Brunn.